Hi Ken, welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
What's new? Have you attended actually Java 1?
Yes, I had the good fortune of going to Java 1. I had one session that I was presenting with another individual, and it was really about seeing the old gang again.
Mhm.
It's been a couple years, and so it was just fun to hang out with that same group who all we've done is write tweets to each other in the last 3 years.
And what is your impression of Java 1? It was the very first time in Las Vegas. So how was it?
Well, certainly, if we focus exclusively on the conference, I suspect there was a last minute nature to it. Nobody really knew if it was going to happen. And so I think we all agreed that attendance was much lower because individuals didn't have enough time to make the necessary arrangements, work it out with their employer, and so on. Certainly, the quality of the sessions were as good as ever before. Not a big fan of Las Vegas as a destination, only because I don't gamble and I don't drink,
Yeah.
which appears to be the only other two things, or going to see rock bands from the 80s and 90s playing at hotels.
The originals, or
Yeah, yeah, you walk down the strip and, Bruno Mars is playing, a whole range of bands that were more popular again back in the 80s, 90s, even the 2000s. This is where you go for your residency, so you don't have to travel.
okay? Because I was in Las Vegas once on the server side conference, and I was pleasantly actually surprised about Las Vegas. I thought it is way worse. And but I don't drink and I don't gamble either. But still, I was actually it was better than expected. So I was able now to walk the strip, and it was nice weather, and it was better than some places in Germany, in larger cities. So for me, I actually was absolutely okay back then, or okay, I would say it was way better than expected. So I was pleasantly actually surprised by the entire Las Vegas experience. For me, it was more like Disneyland for grown-ups.
I've definitely heard that expression. It's and it is an interesting place. I think everybody has to go there at least once. And if I ever go back, it may only be for other conferences. But for myself, anyways, I just did not see that for my wife and I as a destination where we would do stuff. My wife and I have traveled throughout Europe. We've even been to Japan. We like to see these things we've seen on TV. So going to Vegas, I kept looking for CSI people, crime scene investigation. I was looking for chalk outlines on the streets, but I didn't see any of that. But it just didn't tickle me.
But I would say for conference, is Las Vegas great, right? Because you spend the entire time in the sessions anyway. And if you walk out, there's a food. What I remember is I forgot some cable. And I remember that in the Caesar Palace, I think in the hotel, there was even an Apple store. So I walked down and bought the cable, then walked back to the session, and it just worked out. So I would say, as a destination for a conference event, it is great, right? Oh no?
Absolutely, right. The facilities, the,
Yeah.
the the room, and everything else, first rate.
For vacations, I
But
will never do this, but for conferences, actually,
yeah,
yeah,
that's it.
yeah,
That's it.
okay.
I have no problem going there for a conference, but certainly no. If I were going to do a vacation, no, I'd find somewhere else. Though my wife and I may go back to that area because I've never been to the Grand Canyon, for instance,
Yeah.
which isn't that far from Vegas. And there's some other, amazing pieces of geology in that part of the U.S. that I've never had a chance to see.
How far is it from you, from Canada? So how long you have to fly to Las Vegas?
5.5 hours.
Okay,
It's
so it's
almost as long as going to Europe.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, funny actually, right? So
Yeah.
interesting. So pre-recording, we had a very short chat, like 30 seconds, until I interrupted you. We have to record now, and so we talk about the time. So you ask me now how it's going, and I say, okay, great. So the problem is the time. The time just flies. And you said something interesting, that as you were a kid, the time was how to call it. Everything was slower. It's
That's
and now
right.
it
Everything took longer.
took longer, and now it accelerates. And this is also my experience. What I remember as a teenager, sometimes stuff was boring, and I had to kill the time. But now no more. For years no more. And even if there's nothing to do, it's still it just flies. Is it interesting? Is it like scientifically proven? It would be interesting, because it seems like common perception across all people. Actually, the older you are, the faster the time goes, right?
I'm certainly not aware of any, research on the subject, but that's certainly, in talking to people I know and other friends in my age group, and I'm 68 now. Yeah, no, things happen a lot faster. You seem to have less time to sit back and relax. Oh
Exactly.
no, we don't have enough time to do this, to do that.
Exactly. And it actually should be the other way around, right? Because if you are young, everything is new and exciting.
Yeah.
And now it should be boring because, okay, we see this and we are bored because this is nothing
Hmm.
new, but this is actually exactly the opposite, which is even more interesting. So maybe, one explanation would be if you are, let's say, one day old, then it's a one day, this is your entire life. But if you are 16 years old, let's say, right, then it's the one day less significant. Maybe it is the relation between the time and your age.
Somewhere there's got to be somebody doing a PhD on this right now.
Right now, exactly. This is. I thought you are one of the guys, but what we wanted to talk about today is what does it mean to be a professional programmer. And we stopped doing this the last time, and now is the question. Now you told me the last time that you talk with students regarding testing and unit testing, and this would be actually interesting from your perspective. So actually, what does it mean to be a professional programmer exactly? So I ask you the question right away. So what to do? I would like to be a professional programmer. What I have to do to be one?
Well, I've always felt that being a programmer is an engineering discipline.
Mhm.
And it's not, as some people like to think of it, as an art form. It is about applying recognized principles to solve problems.
Mhm.
So when you say, what does it mean to be a professional programmer? It begins by recognizing what these principles are,
Mhm.
what the approach is. And there's many different, there's object-oriented languages, functional languages, and so on. And so they'll take
But
a
let's stick
different
with
approach.
Java. This is what we can,
Okay.
common ground. So I know Java, you know Java, and so exactly. Let's say we are hired to build a Las Vegas conference management system,
Hmm.
LCMS, and yeah, how we would start.
Well, the first thing is always the analysis of the requirements.
Mhm.
What do you expect from the system? I know as a teacher, it was frustrating to try and convince my students that they needed to map out, to put down on paper, use that old-fashioned thing called a pencil, and, and think about what your program's going to do. For many students, the adrenaline rush comes from writing code,
Mhm.
running it. It works.
Mhm.
I'm all happy.
Mhm.
But if you don't know what exactly you're trying to accomplish, right, you're just adding more and more time. So, the first part of being a professional programmer is understanding how to plan, how to, develop the approach you're going to take before you write a single line of code. That could involve flowcharts, UML diagrams,
But exactly
even
now,
just,
let's say we do the conference management system. So
okay.
I have the pencil and paper. What do we do?
Well, the questions you start asking are, what information must this system capture? So if we say it's a conference management system,
Mhm.
what does that mean?
Exactly.
Are we talking about, well, we've been to conferences ourselves. We know what it is. There's, all the information about sessions, all the information about attendees,
Mhm.
all the information about speakers, call for proposals. It's actually a good time to talk about it because I'm in the middle of finishing the organization of the J Champions Conference
Okay.
that happens in January. right? So I've been going through those steps using different applications, but you have to know what the information, the data is, and what you want to accomplish from it. What do you want from it? Is it going to produce schedules? Is it going to create web pages? Is it
Yeah, but usually
paper?
you are hired by a someone who has usually a half idea what it means, right? So this is the if someone would to have a conference management system, and actually I worked a lot because I was often hired as a speaker, so I had a direct contact with the people who run the conferences, and they more or less had a half idea. So they asked me even once whether I could write a conference management system for them. And I asked them, "No, what do you expect?" And they had no idea. So this is reality. So the question is, how to deal with it. So how we deal with the situation, because the main problem is that the people who hire you have no idea what to build, right?
That's it. One of the things, I had mentioned UML earlier. There's some good things about the UML, some things not quite so good, but I've always enjoyed the use cases. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of silly stick figure diagram that you can sit down with a client and say, okay, this particular employee in your organization will be responsible for this. People wanting to attend will send input in this way. So this is what I mean. Before you write a line of code, you need to identify everything that you plan to do. And that becomes even more important when you start talking about billing, because you want to make sure that you and the client are on the same page, that you've agreed on the type of work to be done. They know what they're getting, so that, and it's going to happen, as you get close to the end, they suddenly realize, ooh, we need feature X, feature Y. We forgot to include food in the management system.
Yes.
Well, that's cool. Here's all our documentation. You never mentioned food before. You want to talk about it now, that's another 20, 30, 50 hours, and it's going to cost you that much more.
But you said everything. I don't think it's possible to have everything. What I would suggest in such a case, hopefully I'm still professional then, but I would start, let's start with the sessions. So let's say, forget speakers. Let's create just session management. And don't talk about speakers. It's a little bit risky because it may happen that there is no session without a speaker, but at least we can focus on sessions right now and do the speaker management later. So what I will do, I would start we could use cases, but what I planned, but I'm more from the developer perspective. What I'm thinking in entities, what are the essential substantives, the substance of the system. So let's say session, how a session looks like. So your title, the length and so forth, because and this is actually the start of the architecture, because if we have the entity, the class, then the next step, we have maybe a database table, or what usually happens, we had at least a subsystem. So we will have in Java a package, a subsystem with the name session. And this is where there are two approaches. So use cases is more like analyst level. And, with the entities, the essential entities is more like developer or designer level, right? So we have two how to call it, points of view, actually, right? So from outside is the use case perspectives, the outside view, and the insight into the system is more like, which data do we have to deal with. And I call that essential entities, or the coarse-grained domain object. So we have at least one session, and this is the rough data of the session, like title, maybe the speaker description, and this is basically it, right?
Absolutely, but it goes back to the question: how exactly have you acquired this job? Are there architects who have done the use cases, mapped out all the functionality required, and now it's being given to the developers to implement it? Or if you're, a small contractor, you may be responsible for everything from architecture right down to the final code. So it's important, I think, that a developer, a professional developer, has to know something about architecture, that they have to be able to, tell clients, yeah, this is the approach we're going to take, and even to say no. Or if they're not talking directly to their client, then they're talking to the same company, their architects, their analysts, and saying, hey, you've given me something, but it's not going to make sense. It's not going to work here.
A question to
So,
you, because I did
yeah.
also some UML modeling at some years ago. Question to you personally: are you actually able to write spec without coding? Because for me, I can do it maybe half a day or a day, and then if I code a little bit, I'm forced to think more precisely about the problem. Because if you're just drawing circles and UML, you maybe conference management system is too easy. But if you usually the next problem we have is I never built a system twice, so every project is different, completely different, right? So and if you model from high level, after one day you say, okay, I know everything, right? But then you start to code, like, oh man, we forgot completely about versioning or locking or whatever, and then we have to re-specify. So maybe it is an iteration. So a little bit coding, a little bit specifying, a little bit coding, because for me it's really hard to sit down and specify the system correctly.
I understand what you're saying. The issue, of course, is, and there's my concern. If I don't have a good handle on what exactly the system is, if I haven't, for instance, if we say, where do we start? I would start with database tables, right? This would be one of the very first things I would be developing based on the information from the client. And this gives me an opportunity to see all the information I have and then develop code. I'm not quite sure if you're a professional, you have a company, you're doing software design, that you can say to a client, okay, here's a little bit of what we're going to do, but I'll come back to you with the rest of it once I code a little bit of it so I can decide what the next thing is. I don't think you're going to have a good relationship with a client.
It depends, because some of the clients, they have actually no idea how the system will look like, right? Because what I also, they have even not now it's a little bit easier because we have the mobile phones, but a few years back we had internal clients who knew the host system, for instance, the ZOS, had no idea about PC, let's say. So they and then it was really hard because we talk about UIs and they say, okay, what is it? And then in one point of time we even had to emulate the behavior of the host system with a swing, for instance, which was really hard. Now it is easier because everyone knows, the web UIs, everyone has a tablet or a smartphone. So there is at least a common ground how a user interface should look like. But even then, is it reactive, or should we, block the UI and waiting? Should we update it reactively? So sometimes it is easier to have a working proof of concept. So we can have this session, with subset of the UI, then go back to the client, they see the UI and say, okay, cool, let's do the same for the speakers or for whatever, right? Or CSI cases. Yeah. And so it is not that easy, what I wanted to tell you. So I think it's sometimes really hard, to use case diagrams to communicate with the clients, even user stories, which are similar to use cases, more like, like a story. What should happen is a little bit less formal and therefore maybe more suitable for non-technical clients, but it's still hard to capture, the system.
I understand what you're saying, but I really feel that both the developer and the client has to have, before that first line of code is written, a good idea of what is going to come out at the other end. To say, okay, you want a session management system. I really want to know what the client thinks that's going to mean to them, right? And if they come back and they say, well, client management or session management, it means we're going to manage sessions. Well, tell me what you've been doing to manage sessions. How have you been doing it up until now? Exactly. I certainly have my idea of what that means, but that could be very different from what the client thinks managing sessions is.
Therefore, it's a very good idea to have a good connection to the client. So if the client sits near you, it's really the best, because you can code a little bit, show him the user interface, and say, okay, this is what you actually think about. As the client says yes or no, this would be the best, I would say.
Well, it's interesting. My son works for a software development company here in Montreal. He's in charge of QA, and I've learned a lot about how these companies, organize projects.
Hmm.
And so you have, the project or the project owner.
Hmm.
This becomes the stand-in for the client
Hmm.
for all the developers and the QA people,
Hmm.
so that there is somebody close by, but that project owner has to have a good relationship with the client
Hmm.
to make sure that they're passing the right information on to their development team.
Yes.
So it comes down to how big an organization you are. My son works at a company with over 100 people, right? A big development team and so on. Or you're, I spent 7, 8 years as a one-man shop before I got into teaching.
Hmm.
And I know one of the, most important things that I figured out quite early on was I had to be on the same page as my client.
Yes. Hmm.
Right? Because, if we did something and the client said, gee, that's not what I wanted, I really needed to be able to show them that based on our earlier discussions, this is what you wanted.
Yes.
And otherwise, we're going to have to talk about more money if you want me to start making significant changes at this point now that you've seen it.
And what I also not even about money. So what I also notice is sometimes clients just tend to forget things and not
Mm-hmm.
just really forget, not in the evil way to forget. They
Yeah.
just forget stuff. So sometimes I said, you don't remember? We talk about that. This was exactly your opinion, and they just cannot remember. But if we write it down or capture it somehow, it remains at least a statement. So this is what I sometimes regretted. So okay, we actually spent the entire workshop just talking about the thing the client agreed, and now they completely forgot actually the solution to the problem, right? So this was, which is for a consultant is great because I can sell the same solution again, but sometimes it's annoying because you can also do different stuff. So yeah, this is okay. So we covered a little bit the analysis phase of a system. So we have to agree, with the client to what we are building, and we should create a mock or whatever to make it more clear how it is going to work, and maybe even show a system which is similar to our system and talking about the competition or whatever, so that we have clear understanding what we are talking about. So okay, and you start with database tables. So the same here. I start with the essential entities or domain objects,
Right.
and they are actually, if you do it with JPA, Java Persistence API, they are mapped one-to-one to the tables. In NoSQL databases, even more interesting, because what can happen is that multiple such essential entities are mapped to one document or
Mm-hmm.
S3 bucket that you can store the entire domain graph in one as one document, as one JSON blob. Okay, so understood. So same here, because first you need the entities, the pure domain objects, and then we need the behavior. This is like the boundary of the system. So how I think about this, there are the entities and there's the boundary, the perimeter to the outside world, and this is this can be REST UI, and then at the other end we have the user interface, which is these days usually some kind of a web app usually.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing that's, when I go back to my time
Mm-hmm.
working,
Mm-hmm.
it was you would get a contract and you would basically say to the client, okay, see you in 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
see you in 6 months, see you in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of that time, you'd show up and you'd be sweating, hoping that what you were showing them
Mm-hmm.
is what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's not the way most organizations work. The buzzwords of agile and so on. I don't really care what you call your framework, but it's important today that your client is involved in the process.
Yes.
That you can start showing them preliminary work as quickly as possible. That you almost want to make the client feel like they're part of the development team.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another critical part about being a professional engineer, that, again, going back in the old cliche of the developers always worked in the sub-basement and grew mushrooms on their monitors and never met another living soul. I've told my students over the years, that you'll probably spend as much as half of your time just talking to clients, talking to other people on your team, interacting, reviewing. It's not that, I stick my head in my keyboard and nobody sees me until it's done. And that's part of being a professional programmer. You have to be good with people. I
Yes.
think that people skills are critical now.
Preliminary work is a dangerous thing because if you show your client a user interface, in my opinion, it must not look good. If you create, in the earliest iterations, an interface which looks great, client thinks is done. It happened, several times to me. So if you have, a user interface, don't use, the best CSS. Do it later. And you remember Swing?
Oh, yes.
You remember napkin look and feel?
It's funny you mentioned that. I would always show that in my classes when we did Swing. I thought it was the most obscene look and feel.
Yeah, it looks not right. So it looks completely broken. Yeah. But this is what I will show to client. Say, okay, we are not done. And at the end, we did, the substance look and feel, for instance, which looked always great. And but because the clients, if they see buttons and you push the button, something happened. They think the project is done.
Yeah.
And this is because someone who is not developer, they don't even know where the code runs, right? So if you are not a developer and you see something on the screen, you think it is working. It's exactly for us. If we see a car, we are expecting it already drive. So if we will hire someone to build us a car, and I see the car, my expectation is I can just use it. Also, it's just an empty shell. So it's the same for the software development. So this is also interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, what about testing?
It's funny. I mentioned the last time we spoke that I'm working on a book, and I'm up to chapter 11, and that's all about testing.
Are you done with the book, actually?
No, there's 15 chapters, and I'm just up to 11.
To 11. This is 11 is the most important chapter, I think.
Yeah.
It's not 10, it's 11.
Yeah. So, I've always felt...
You had so much time. It's still not done. So I thought, I will re-invite you back in December. The book is done, and we can talk about the book. This was the plan, Ken.
I know. But let me tell you, writing is a lot harder than I imagined. And we're kind of sliding off topic here, but the key is I don't feel comfortable writing anything unless I can prove that what I'm writing is correct. So I spend a significant amount of time researching everything that I want to say to make sure that I even understand it correctly. And that's led to the discovery of a lot of bad code out there. But that's another story. Writing the book has been exciting.
What's the title of the book? What's the title?
The book is called Transitioning to Java. And it's aimed at developers who already code in another language, who find themselves in a situation where they've suddenly been asked to take over some Java code, contribute some Java code, and so they really need to try and get up to speed as quickly as possible. It's a handbook more than anything else, that each of the chapters look at different aspects of the language. We can't go too deep. The publisher isn't interested, and I wasn't interested in writing 800 or 900 pages. I never thought I could. I've since learned I could if I needed to. But the idea is, if you've barely ever seen Java and suddenly you've got some code in front of you, hopefully this book that I'm writing will help you understand what you're looking at and what you're going to have to do to, add to it, maintain it, and so on. So when we come to testing, one of the things that I felt strongly about in my courses was that your code doesn't work until the testing works, till the unit testing or integration testing, depending on how complex the system is. And why this is interesting, and I'll send you this link separately and you can publish it, but it showed up that somebody did research, an actual academic paper on how many developers actually employ unit testing. And the results of this research, basically a survey of developers around the world, was absolutely scary. Less than half of the developers deliver code that's been tested. And I went, but How can you do that? How do you know if you have a function that's expecting a value? How do you know how it's going to behave if the value is too small, too large, it's the wrong type? Generics in Java because it's a compile time rather than a runtime. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And if you aren't prepared for them. Now, a lot of people talk about test-driven development. I think that may come after many years of experience. But this idea that every time you write a public method, whether it's server-side, desktop, mobile, that the next thing you write is the unit test for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know I can say that until I'm blue in the face, and very few programmers want to do that because writing tests isn't as much fun as writing the application code. So it keeps being put off. And then you say to your supervisor, your lead, the owner, well, I'm finished writing all the code, but I need a couple days to write the unit tests. And I think more often than not, they're going to say, well, did it crash when you ran it? No, it's done.
Exactly.
So you have to get into that idea that you write tests while you code, not after. Possibly before, but never after.
Ken, you will enjoy an Airhacks FM episode of this podcast, number 103. You know the title? Unit Testing Considered Harmful. You have to listen to it. This is with
I'm making a note of the number.
Yeah, 103. And what the problem I see in the wild is, so large companies, right? So the large companies are hiring consultants to write up external people to write software system. And now in the contract, they see, okay, we need a high code coverage for unknown reasons, 80%. And what the developers are doing, because it's in the contract, they are writing the 80% code coverage. And of course, what is the easiest way to achieve that? So you start, to write tests for code with no business logic. And the remaining 20% are, as the crucial code which is hard to test, but everything is 80% tested. And, the project is green, they get, the contract that actually nothing was tested at all. So what I do in my projects, so we do the unit tests on demand. And instead of unit tests, we write end-to-end or system tests. So in our contents management system, what I will do is I will just, use the Jupyter, so JUnit 5. But instead of writing unit or integration tests, I'm testing the system from outside first. So what I would like to have is the automated, API interaction with the system from day one. So if we would, we have the database tables. The next step, what you said, I would like to start with database tables. So I start with the entities. The next step would be to have, create, read, update, delete, whatever, or just, create an update or whatever, just to, or insert just to the database. So I will create a boundary with a REST interface and immediately write a test for it and see whether the entire life cycle is working, from the beginning to the end. So we can, and this is the most crucial part, is like, driving the car. And what happens then is, the next step is, I will find out that it's actually impossible to test everything from outside, because I cannot reach, all the corner cases you mentioned. So it is impossible. I just, for instance, can just, create a session, but I cannot test from outside, whether the speaker name is too long or the title, contains some words which are not allowed or whatever. And for that, I would write unit tests. So in my projects, in the very beginning, there are almost no unit tests and a lot of system tests. And the longer we spend in the projects, the more unit tests we are writing. So which is interesting. So if you would see my project at the beginning, the unit test code coverage would be maybe 10%. System test coverage from outside is maybe 80%. So usually. And what I'm doing then, I'm misusing the system tests to find unused code. Because if you call the system via API from outside, what you see is, okay, I called, create a session. So my expectation is if I create a session via our system, all the critical path is called. Now the question is why there is some, left over, why some code is not executed, and maybe it's forgotten code, so we delete the code. So this is actually my unusual approach, and it works quite well. Because if you start with unit tests, your system is not operational. It's like, I always say, if you're a car builder, you just push the buttons in a car without driving it. So maybe everything looks nice, but it is not operational.
I agree with you completely in terms of that particular approach. Again, my perspective, because it has been many years since I've actually written any software professionally, it's all about, when you look at somebody who's coming into the profession who wants to be a developer, I think in the beginning of your career, unit testing has to be important to you. With experience, you can begin to see, as probably your 103 podcast points out, that unit tests can become a false indicator of the success of the project. I can certainly understand that.
And the main problem with that is just statistics, because for most system tests you don't get the code coverage because it's harder to set up. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to get the stats for the unit test coverage. So what many projects are doing, a lot of projects are doing, they are just using the unit tests, to drive the code coverage, and they're completely ignoring the code coverage from system tests. This is what I see in the wild, which is not reasonable. And I would say, and then it's more fun, because what you're actually doing, you are automating from outside your system, right? So you are calling, the endpoints, and something happens behind the scenes, and this is actually fun. And unit tests are fun later, because my way of testing is too slow. So if I invoke everything from outside, I have to wait until the system is deployed. So then I will find out, okay, I would like to test, this corner case, but it's really hard with the system test. So I just spend time in unit testing then. And even more important than system tests are stress tests, because lots of projects are breaking because they have memory leaks, they have inconsistencies, logs, optimistic logs, and whatever. And you can only test that with concurrency. It is impossible to do it with unit tests. So the next step is we have system tests, and then on top of that, immediately we run just brute force attacks against our system to see how it behaves, how much memory it consumes, is it, how much CPU we can have in production. And then we do a little bit almost chaos engineering. So what I mean by that, we try to misconfigure the system. What happens if there are not enough, JDBC connections? Or what happens if there are not enough threads? Because I would like, to see as many problems as possible during development. So this is my, hacky way of building systems.
Well, I wouldn't call it hacky. I think we agree on, testing. Yeah. It's just, what type, when, and I don't think there's a wrong answer here. Whether you start with system tests, and as you start to see problems, you then move to unit tests to better identify where that problem may be in the system, or even work the other way around, feel comfortable that, all your methods are working, and then see what happens when they're now all working together as a system. What's important is you've got to do both.
Yes.
You can't just say, well, the system tests are fine, or it's like I've always loved playing with Selenium. There's another level of testing, testing the user interface. And that, talk about finding ways to just destroy software.
Cypress?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Cypress is a nice Selenium. So Cypress is like you can load in Chrome the website and automate it fully. The problem with Selenium was it goes over network. So there are lots of lockups, and it was slow and not always reliable. But with Cypress, it works better. Oh, your dog.
Yep. My dog is barking. My wife has just come home, so my dog has heard the dog.
What's the name of
her name is Willow.
Willow. Oh, Willow.
Yeah.
And is it like what kind of dog is it?
It's a Shetland sheepdog.
Uh-huh.
So this is a dog that looks like a collie, like Lassie, a famous dog, except she's only 16 inches tall.
Okay.
So she's a small dog.
Okay.
And
But very
oh,
smart, right?
yes, very, very smart. And she does my taxes. She has some trouble with deductions,
Okay,
but otherwise,
what she does? The unit test first or system test? What she prefers?
she's a system
A
test
system.
person. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
she's the
Not
big
person.
picture.
Not person.
Just
Very good. Okay, so I agree. Maybe the difference is, or the difference, if you build software, the goal should be to build great software, and the goal should
Mhm.
not be, to to game the system. This is what I see in the wild. That lots of metrics are in place to misuse them. And the
Mhm.
metrics should help us and not be so, okay, if we implement the 80% code coverage, then the system is good. So or if we have 5 iteration a day, then there's a good software. No, we already know that iteration is good, and the stats can help us, but we should keep in mind that what we are building has to be reasonable, and the client should be happy, right? So this is the main goal. And sometimes
Mhm.
people forget about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just I remember that there was a research, or at least an interview with military, and they asked the I don't know whom, but there was like special task forces and special forces, and they asked the people why you are here, and everyone knew exactly what the goal of the project is and what the purpose of the role is. And in the larger the project in software engineering, the more people forget what they're actually doing. This is the this is the problem. And so I would say, but it's got really better in recent years. That the teams are smaller, they are really motivated. I would say, so I see a huge progress. I didn't expect that, but this is true. Actually, everything is getting better. The software engineering is more fun, and is more pragmatic and more productive than it was 5 years ago.
No question about it, and it is maturing.
Yeah.
You know, there was the mainframe programmer, and they had their style, and
But
then
the
suddenly the small system showed
mainframe
up.
programmers were incredibly productive. So I met, a
Yeah.
lot of them, and they were extremely pragmatic. They knew what they are doing, and they understood everything. The problem were we Java developers, because with 20 layers of abstractions, without knowing why. So
Yep.
yeah. Okay. What are the next steps? So what we covered already is testing with a little bit analysis of the software, right? So with UML and what else? So you can also cover stuff from a book if you like. So what else we need to know to be a professional programmer or developer? Or or,
Uh,
or a question to you: what's the difference between programmer and developer?
I've I've generally thought of those two terms as synonymous, right? That they're the same thing. I guess developer sounds a little classier than programmer
Yeah.
because but I think they're the same in terms of what else. And again, I'll refer to something I just finished writing in the book I'm working on, is having a good understanding of both software principles and software patterns. So, one of the things I've always stressed in my students is things like single responsibility, separation of concerns, that these are guiding principles that you need to think about every single day
Hmm.
and for every line of code you write.
Hmm.
Then there's patterns. Patterns represent an approach, a way in which to solve the specific problem. The classic is a singleton pattern or an adapter. And there's, certainly lots of patterns and lots of books written on it. But in terms of what skills you need, it's more than just knowing how to write the code, but to understand the approach.
Hmm.
Um, the classic example is you want to build a bridge, and I discovered, as part of my research for my book, that there are 7 different types of bridges. Suspension, different types, the way they're held up. And so somebody building a bridge begins by deciding which of these patterns they're going to use, and then using their engineering, architecture, whatever skills, civil
Almost Christoph
engineering.
Alexander, right, from Gang of Four.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah,
That's where it all came from. And I think today a professional programmer needs to be versed in that. That they can't look at every problem as I've never seen this before.
they look at
Because the reality
they
is,
look at Stack Overflow. You know.
yeah, oh no, 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 no. Oh, geez, Stack Overflow. It's a great place to get some ideas, but certainly for students and stuff, they're usually reluctant to prove to themselves that what they've just copied from Stack Overflow actually works.
Yeah. Are you
You
actually
know?
aware of GRASP, General Responsibility Assignment Software Patterns?
Oh, okay. I've heard the term before. Yes.
There is an from Craig Larman with a great book. It's a little bit older. It's Applying UML and Patterns, but this book is extremely pragmatic UML book. And why I like it that much, because this is a Wikipedia page. So if you search for GRASP object-oriented design, you will find that. And basically he has patterns, but these patterns are more like meta patterns. It's not like Gang of Four. It's just how to build a system so it works. So I give you an example. So his patterns are information expert, creator, controller, indirection, low coupling, high cohesion, polymorphism, protected variations, and pure fabrication. And so I used these ideas a lot because information expert are actually your database tables. So the idea is if we start, with let's say the session, then is the session the information expert because the session contains the essential knowledge about the system. So this is our conference session. The problem with it is the more we build a system, let's say we have a session and the session has tags. So session has some tags. So the tags become a part of the session. Then we have the author, and the author is an attribute of the session. Later can be an own entity, but if you are not cautious, everything becomes the session. So it's like a monolith session, right? So this is the information expert. So then we have the creator. The creator is the question. So we have the session, but how the session is actually created? It's not about the factory, about the fact that we need the insert in the table. So we need something which takes the data and does new session. How this is working. And this is called pure fabrication. So I just looking up the names.
Yeah.
And the pure fabrication means the session is a pure domain object, but the pure domain object does not start. It doesn't work. So what we need is a sum of an ugly class which boots the session. This can be AWS Lambda. This could be an EJB, a servlet, a CDI bean, whatever you have, a Java bean. It has nothing to do, with the business logic. It has something to do that with the framework we are using, something which, starts the entire thing. And this is called pure fabrication. Protected variations, another thing, is then we we have the payment system you mentioned. And we recognize that there is no one payment system. Maybe there are 10. And but we would like not to be depending on PayPal. We would like to have an interface to payment systems, and this is where protected variations came in place. Okay, we would like to protect from the payment variation, so we introduce a Java interface to be able to handle the various ways of billing or paying. And polymorphism, of course, is like object-oriented way, also very important, because in one point of Java, I would say 10 years ago, systems, what I noticed, there was no object orientation. So we had the database tables, The database table had a column, type, and then developers did, if type book, then, we do this. If otherwise this. And they forgot that we have instance of an inheritance, for instance. So if you have too many, type queries, it's time maybe to introduce inheritance. So this was the polymorphism, and low coupling and high cohesion is the best way to design Java packages. What it means, whatever is not even Java packages. So you mentioned methods. So it's Java class first. All methods in a Java class has to have something in common. with each other. Otherwise, they are not cohesive. So yeah, if you have a session, so we should have just session related methods, but not payment. It should be in the in payment processor, for instance, not in the session. And so there is the high cohesion and low coupling means the session should be decoupled from payment, let's say. So and then this basically what was. So what it means is you are constantly revisiting all the patterns, the grasp patterns, and you are iteratively build a system. The interesting part is if you just focus on one pattern, your system is out of balance, because with information experts, everything is becoming not single purpose class, everything is becoming one class. So I bought this book, I don't know, 15 years ago. If it's still available, you should really buy it. It's a great book. And the Gang of Four patterns and come later. So this just explains how to design a system, and the Gang of Four patterns is how concretely implement the requirements from GRASP.
Right. So it's interesting, as you've been talking, we haven't really said anything about actual coding skills. We're really still talking about, what are the approach? How are we going to design our code?
Yes.
How are we going to work it out? And I think, there are a lot of people who are really skilled in developing code, but less so in, analyzing and understanding the problem, right? That, there's still some people who believe all I want to do is write code, just tell me what you want and you'll get it. And where we started talking is, no, I think the programmer, that developer, whichever term you like, has to be involved as soon as possible. Start meeting the clients.
The programmer and developer, why I asked, I remember it was a huge German company, the year I would say 2002 maybe, or 2000, something like this. And the developers, they had a meeting, a long meeting, and I was an external consultant, and there were internal developers, and they discussed whether on the business card should be, some certified Java programmer or developer. So this was the discussion. So this will ask I remembered, the meeting is okay, programmer or developer. Regarding coding, so I would say one skill is very important to me is to be able to write a very simple code, and don't try even to use all Java features if they are not necessary. What I see a lot in projects that the Java developers try to implement whatever they know for Hello World. And this makes the code very complicated, and the code is not even well to maintain, because if you see system out printer is enough, but if you have had a message writer, which is an interface and is created by a factory, which is a reflection, because the writer can be configured in property file, but the property file is too much coupling, so the configurator is an interface which could fetch the configuration over the network or whatever, but the network could be slow, so the configurator has with aspect oriented programming a decorator which caches the configuration. And then at the end, you have Hello World with 50 classes. And this is actually happened to me, not with Hello World, but in one project, I had to read, I got actually the job to read a version number of a device. So it cannot be, that hard. I just call get version number and I have the number. No, there was an entire command framework, and I was actually not able to do it in 3 days, I have to tell. But so this is what I mean. Just write simple code, and this code can really look like JDK 1.1. And you are done. There is no need, to implement to use all the great Java features, because there was a framework and library overused in Java, which led, to I would say to the popularity of scripting languages, because no one in Python, or at least to my knowledge, doesn't start, with 50 layers to fetch something from database. They call it, give me the data from database, and they are happy. Yeah. And the Java developers have, DAOs, interfaces, data transfer objects, and transformers, and aggregators. And at the end of the day, if the database changes, they have to change all the layers anyway.
Well, it's, one of the software principles, of course, is KISS. Keep it simple, and you can figure out what the last S means.
Stupid, of course. And dry.
I was thinking of something worse. But anyways. But this is, there is this somehow this desire. I many years ago we had a student, and he was brilliant. I mean, he handed in solutions that I'd never seen, but he also took pride in his complexity. And I would have to take him aside, and I'm saying, yeah, this is brilliant, but out in the field, if this goes out, if you ever leave the company, no one is ever going to understand why the heck you did this. I don't care how much documentation you write. It's just so different
Yeah.
from established patterns. And granted, let me compliment you, brilliant work, but you're going to have trouble holding on to a job if every project you take is an attempt by you to demonstrate how amazing you are. And, no, we hired you because you're already amazing. Now write code that our clients want, that we can maintain, that we can evolve, we can get a revenue stream from. That's your role.
Yeah. And I think there is no reason, regardless how smart are you actually, to write a complex code, I would say. Right?
That's true. That's true. You don't have to be smart to be complex.
Exactly. Listen, we cannot cover everything, but I gave you a last chance. Let's say in a Vue month, I expect you to write the remaining 4 chapters. And
Yes.
then we can, meet again, but then there is no excuse. I know I expect from you to have a completed book, and we can talk, about the book a little bit if you like.
I'd love to. It's close. I even have a cover, so I've seen what the cover is going to look
You should
like.
not spend, this is the problem with professional writers. They spend, they waste time with covers and forget about the chapters.
Oh, wait a minute. Luckily, that's what the publisher company,
I know.
Pack, is my publisher. And yeah, no, it didn't go quite as fast, so they've got me on a much shorter leash. We're down to a chapter a week.
Oh,
And I've delivered the last 2 chapters under that schedule, and I'm going to be starting the next one tomorrow. So we're looking at my writing finished by, say, the first week in January, whatever edits. What's interesting about the process is as I submit work, I'm getting, feedback from the editorial, and there are 2 domain experts, there are technical reviewers who read everything and send me notes, and I've got to, respond to them along the way.
hopefully you don't
So,
get, more notes than your text. Then, you have trouble.
Well, I think one of the reasons that makes me take as long as I have been to write this is the last thing I want to see from a technical reviewer is something like, "Are you out of your mind? That's not how it works." And so I want to make sure that, somebody who has, and one of my reviewers is far more skilled than I am, doesn't feel that I've, embarrassed him or embarrassed me by what I've said. And that takes a lot of effort, right? Mastering the writing, getting the English syntax.
Yeah.
The last chapter I finished, when I put it through one of these, grammar thingies, it came back and said, all is good.
Okay.
Which is a big difference from chapter 1, where it gave me a really long list of all the things I did wrong with the English language. So I'm getting better there, and the process has been exciting. But yeah, no, the book is I've made a commitment. Fortunately, being retired, I have some time.
But time
I also
flies.
wanna get
That's the problem, right? So
That's it, exactly. We started this in June, and no problem. It'll all be finished by the beginning of December. And here I am with still 5 chapters left to go. So it's all a learning experience. The other day I was reading somebody I know talking about, they just finished their book. It only took them 2 years.
Yeah.
And I'm going, oh, geez.
Perfect. Ken, then I would say let's try in spring again. Maybe the book is out, so just ping me and we'll talk the remaining professional programmer things and about your book.
Yep. Don't worry. I will be plastering its cover all over social media, just to make sure that I sell at least 1 copy.
Yeah, 2, because I will also buy it. So just out of principle. Perfect.
Okie doke.
Where people can find you on the internet, give me, your, I think Omniprof, right?
Omniprof. I've managed to grab that name. I think I told you before.
Yeah.
When I was programming as a contractor, I had a company I called Omnibus. And so I put Omni in front of all kinds of things.
Now
So,
there should be an Omni book.
yeah, exactly. My website is omnijava.com,
Okay.
OmniProf, and you'll find me OmniProf
There's
on
even
Twitter, on
Omni
Mastodon.
Group, Omni Group.
Yeah.
So you are the CTO or CEO. This is why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Perfect. It was, I would say, a great conversation, really. So,
thank you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it because I remembered the grasp, which I almost forgot. And it was, maybe it helps you as well. So take a look at the book, Applying UML and Patterns from Craig Larman. It's a great, great book.
Yeah. I enjoy the opportunity to talk with you, and I get to learn something. And
hopefully don't. I'm just a hands down programmer. So whatever I say is not maybe that well thought out. But thank you. So see you in spring.
Great. Absolutely. Take care.